Hello and welcome to Mr. Clark After Dark, everyone. My name is Lucas Clark and I am a certified educator with Alberta Education and the Alberta Teachers Association. All conversations and interactions exchanged is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. In no way does the content discussed intend to be in violation of the ATA Code of Conduct or meant to target any individual student, teacher, or to belittle or demean the profession in any way. If you have something that you would like me to discuss or have a story of your own to share, please reach out at lucasrdclark97@gmail.com. You can also send a direct message to me on Instagram at Mr. Clark After Dark. Hope you enjoy the show, and please do not forget to subscribe. And now, on to the show. Hope you all enjoy. Hello again, everyone, and thanks for coming back to the show. Today I have on the one and only Christina Buhler. She is a French language arts and social studies teacher who is currently in her 4th year in the profession. On this episode, her and I discuss becoming new teachers after COVID-19, teacher comparison, issues regarding French education and the parental debate over whether their kids should go into French immersion or not, our practicum struggles, and focusing on not shaming your students when they are in danger of failing your course. We talk about all of this and much more. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you guys all enjoy the show.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. I remember there was a song, you know Hunter Hayes, the country singer? Mm-hmm. He had a song, it was, start with a W.
Wanted.
Yeah. That was the most played song on my iPod or phone back in the day because I would listen to it to go to sleep.
Really?
So I don't know why. I've really had trouble sleeping, but I noticed.
Oh, I definitely do.
Really?
Yeah, I listen. Okay. It's not Wanted, but like I listen to, it's going to sound really freaking nerdy, the Skyrim background music.
Hey.
It works.
Okay, but I find it was like a weird, because I listen obsessively to music anyway, where I listen to, like right now, Single Soon, Selena Gomez. Wow, what a jam. Yeah. Absolute banger. And I'm like when I ran the half marathon, literally in the caption, well, no,
just that.
I said white girl anthems.
Yes.
And I
love that.
For those, I had like 4. That once I would start getting tired, I'd change the song. It was like a weird mental thing.
So it would be like one song on repeat, and you'd be like, and then you'd skip it once you were sick of it, and you kept going.
Once I had about 8-10 minutes, I noticed like I don't know what the effect is or something that kind of gives you the energy.
I don't want this anymore.
And then I was like, you know what? I'm gonna put on Thick as Thieves by this random. It's just honestly, it's the grossest music ever. But for some reason, the beat just does something to me. I don't know. Well, anyway, I have us rolling already, so It's all good. Okay. It's all good. Now I've just exposed myself with the white girl anthems to everyone, or the few that actually like to listen. But Buhler, how's it going?
It's going great.
Yeah. You're in year 2?
4 actually. What? Yeah, I know. 2020 is when I started.
Oh yeah, I guess I'm in year 2. Okay, so you started in the middle of COVID.
I did.
What? Okay. What was that like? I did not know that.
They before we even got into it, because COVID had started right after I started my second practicum.
Okay.
And so profs were telling us, oh, well, burnout's 5 years. If you can last 5 years in education, then you can probably stick with it.
Yeah.
And when we got into it, I was one of the few that actually graduated that year because some teachers weren't able to finish their practicum or weren't given that quote unquote pity pass.
Yeah, I kind of thought that was weird though. Really, how much you're gonna learn those skills that you learn in your practicum just by failing better every day anyway once you finish. So I didn't really understand that, but so you did pass and you were good.
I was really fortunate because my practicum teacher Nadine Gertner,
You did it here?
I did do it
I did
here.
not know that.
I did
Okay.
do it here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, she allowed me to go back to Edmonton because at the
Mhm.
time I was just like renting a place here,
Yeah.
and I did everything online for the 3 kids who would show up to their online class because it was never like mandatory. It was more like, hey, kids, you can do 1 hour of work a week, and that's all we're asking of you. So, yeah.
Wow. And so you went to, do you have family in Fort McMurray? Why did Fort
I have
McMurray-
extended family in Fort McMurray. So, like my partner's, like most of his family
Mhm.
lives here or lived here.
Yeah.
And I found McTavish when I was looking at some Northern Alberta teaching bursaries, and I fell in love with it, and I was like, hey, this is where I want to be. And so, being able to teach here at the quote unquote dream school that I wanted right out of university was fortunate for me.
So what is the Northern Alberta bursary? Because it's actually something I haven't touched on at all, but
oh gosh,
clutch.
Oh my goodness, this is I'm not going to do it justice. So basically, out of university, you can apply for this bursary, and what it is that like it's trying to encourage more teachers to come teach North.
Yep.
And so there's like a few select schools. I didn't get it, unfortunately.
What? As a French teacher?
I know. I'm not. Maybe I applied wrong. Maybe they were just like, we got enough of you. But yeah,
That's insane. So you didn't get any of the bursaries after?
No, but I mean, we like all Northern teaching people get like the Northern Living Allowance.
Yes, but so I don't mean to like flex on you here, but no, I didn't get, because there's 3 different ones.
Oh.
There's one for the education for, if I think it's while you're doing your university degree, you commit for 3 years, you get 16,000.
Yep.
Right. If you commit for 2 years, it's 8,000. So I actually applied for a different one that was intended just for public sector employees in general.
Okay.
So this one would be like, it'd be social workers, nurses, teachers, etc. But that was for 1 year for 6,000. So I did get that one. I got rejected because I remember there was 160 applicants for 30 bursaries for the teaching one. And they're like, you teach social. Everyone can teach that. Leave us alone. I was like, cool. But then I did end up getting the 6,000 one. But I am shocked that you did not get that as a well, speaking of the issues with French education,
no kidding.
How do you rationalize that? That doesn't even make sense.
I honestly think that maybe they were looking for more like elementary school teachers, because that is like a really big area that they need to fill up here. So at the time they were probably just like, well, we have enough high school French teachers, and because there's only like 3 options for high school French up here in Fort McMurray. You know, you either teach
what are the options?
McTavish, Trinity, or if you're fortunate enough, you go teach at Boreal, but Boreal isn't technically like high school because it only goes up to 9.
So what do you mean by fortunate enough to go to Boreal? Because I literally know almost nothing about the Boreal school. Like, it's a K to 9?
Oh, this is I'm not even sure if I know too much about it. So it's K to 9 francophone. It's part of the Conseil Central, like Center North. So like Edmonton is this, and then we, Fort McMurray, are also connected to the same like district as Edmonton.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
It's very strange.
It's like a regional district kind of thing?
Yeah. There's like 5 in Alberta, like different sectors. Yeah. So right now they have a very small school, haven't had any funding to expand, and so they got like 7, 8, 9 in one class. So like all these kids, like maybe 10 kids are together, having like being taught like 3 different course matters at the same time.
And so for French immersion right now, did you grow up in French immersion? Was your family French?
So my dad's francophone, my mom's anglophone. So I grew up in a francophone school from like K to 8. And then, but because I lived in a really small town in Ontario, the French school offered 0 options. So, you know, you couldn't really branch out and be like, I want to be an art kid or anything like that.
Oh, okay. So pretty like core subjects pretty much.
Yeah, that was basically it until after I left. So
Buhler's gone. Bring him out.
Exactly. So my parents allowed me to go to a local high school, and I don't want to call it French immersion because it wasn't, but they offered French and then social studies in French, similar to what we do here.
Okay.
Yeah, so I did that for a year. So that was my 1 year in French immersion. And then when we moved to Alberta, I had already like cut ties with francophone schools at that point. I
So,
didn't
no
really have
options.
I didn't
I'm
really
out
have
here.
a good relationship with them, so I was
Yeah.
like, okay, well, I'll just go to
So
an
what do you mean
English
by a
school.
relationship? Just like that kind of lack of variety? Is it
Yeah,
kind of tainted it
in
a
my
little bit?
mind, French, like francophone schools didn't offer anything. It was you had your core subjects and that was it, and you went to school with other French-speaking kids whose parents forced them to go there. And
So that kind of brings me to my next point, is because like my wife and I have discussed, when we have kids, do we put them in French immersion? So obviously the Ontario, Alberta is going to be quite different of the what is the value of knowing French kind of thing, which is almost sad to say that that can just be a thing. But would you recommend putting your kids in French immersion? Or does it depend on and I'm not trying to like trip you up here, but
no.
My thing is, do you think that being put into French immersion for kind of your core literacy topics holds you back more than pushes you forward?
I think like it'll depend on the kid and the parents, because it's not like you're gonna send your kid into a French immersion program and then you're like, well, I'm done.
And the thing is, I find parents who usually put their kids in French, if they're not francophone, usually have a more invested interest anyway. Is that a general thing, or is that kind of
most of the time? Because you have your parents that are willing to, learn along with the kids and will provide supports to make sure that the kid is, like doing well in French immersion if they don't speak French themselves. Because a lot of them either didn't get that opportunity growing up and they're like, oh, well, I want my kid to have this opportunity. Or it's one of those things where they're like, well, I did it, so it's your turn. So like I have a bunch of like different situations where I have kids with parents who are super supportive and like are there. I have kids with parents who do speak French. And I was just talking about this with a coworker where like they made the decision to take their kid out of French immersion once they got here, so that they did French immersion from K to 6, just because they noticed that like after a while, like the kid plateaus, where it's like they were doing so well and out of nowhere it's like, well, now I have to translate to understand it. And
like getting into the more advanced language part. Oh, okay.
Kind of where like, maybe the year prior they were getting 90s and everything was making sense, and now it's not coming as easily and they're struggling. And then once they get things explained to them in English again, they're like, why isn't this making sense to me in French?
Yeah. And so one thing I hear a lot is that if you learn kind of mathematics, science in French till grade 6, and then you say, I want to pull the kid out for grade 7, they're almost, and I'm speaking generally here, up like 2 years behind. Is that kind of an accurate statement? So that's that would be my primary concern as a parent because one, obviously, it's a no-brainer to want your kid to be bilingual in a country, because the amount of opportunity you can get, literally just like Nicole, she went in the summer and did this random French exchange program in Nova Scotia. Super cool.
Absolutely.
So that's like a cool opportunity that I would never be able to do because I don't have that language knowledge. But when it comes to what is the benefit of the overall education in terms of, like, you are kind of limiting them in a certain degree. Like you'll never really be able to live in Quebec. You're not like you could, but not as fully as you could if you were kind of
the time to like practicing. Absolutely. Like, so when it comes to math and science, when I switched out of French and then I was, my math and science were in English, and this was Ontario grade 9. It was rough just because like I was still really good at math. I was just relearning a lot of the terms in English.
How long did that adjustment kind of take, where you kind of felt like, I guess I don't really want to measure everything in grades, but how long did it kind of take to bridge that gap?
It took me like a year. But only because in grade 9, like my math teacher, like didn't really care. He wasn't like, well, why don't you know this? This is ridiculous. And well, I'm your one kid that came from a francophone school. When it came to science, like I found that it was like I was still really good. I didn't really see anything there. Just again, not a great teacher, grade 9. Like the whole 2 years behind thing, I think that'll depend on. And
I just kind of use two, generally speaking. Like, and I obviously you had a francophone dad, right? Yeah. And so, did you talk French at home very much?
Like a mix. Like I still call my dad, and then we'll speak in French. But if mom's around, like it'll be in English.
Like it almost needs to be practical. Like you kind of need to have an attitude toward keeping it in order to actually make it effective.
Yeah,
so before, I want to heap on the French part, but what you just said about your two teachers that you've had in high school, that you were just like, F you, why would you treat me like that? So one of my big things as to why be a teacher is kind of going through school, you experience some shitty individuals.
Oh yeah.
Right? As a student, I mean, not every teacher is perfect, and not trying to blanketly blame or say anyone specifically, but what are kind of the characteristics that you embody now from teachers that you didn't like growing up?
Well, like that specific science teacher, like, and I'm sure he was like a good teacher, but he had that mentality of like, I know everything. I am the epitome of
knowledge.
Yeah. So, you know, what I say goes. And if you don't understand what I'm saying, then clearly you're dumb because I'm saying it the right way. I also had a language teacher in high school. This was like FSL, right? Mm-hmm. And I was fast tracking because I'm francophone, so I was like, well, I'm not going to go to the structured class. I'm just going to do the test, hand them in, etc. And like, well, we can talk about it later, but like, she had a really strong accent bias, where she's like,
"What do you mean by accent bias?"
So, speaking French, like different people will have different like prejudices when it comes to your accent. Yeah.
Okay, I did not know this. Okay.
Like last year was my first encounter with it when a teacher from another district came in to speak with the students, and then when I introduced myself, they were like, "Wow, your French is really good," and I was like, "Oh,
thanks.
Okay, awesome."
I do teach it.
Thanks. Yeah. But like being in Alberta, we have like quite a mix of different accents.
Yeah. Okay.
So like I find that like Francophone Albertans will either have a very kind of like Franco-Ontarian accent, or they'll have an
like
East
an
Coast.
English French? Is
No.
Okay.
No,
so what do you mean by
my accent? Okay. Like my French accent.
Okay.
Or they'll have like an Acadien accent from like the East Coast, because we have a lot of East Coasters here as well. So when you say accent bias, is there like a preferred bias to have? Okay. So yeah,
I don't want to trip you up.
But this is not
no.
However, a lot of people believe that, like the more professional, like French spoken in France, would be quote unquote the ideal.
Like the pure French?
However,
weird.
Like if you ask any of the students here, the second that I put on like a listening comprehension that has a European speaking, they're like, "Miss, what are you doing to our ears?" And
like even they can't understand it, or they just don't prefer it?
They cannot understand it. And then like if I put on an audio that has like a Quebecois accent, but it's like a really fast, slanged up, they don't get that either.
Is that one of the more challenging parts, is picking up on the slang?
It is. Okay. It's also speed. But it's like once you've like in university, I had so many, because I went to the French campus of U of A. I had so many like different. The Augustin or whatever? No, Campus Saint Jean.
Oh right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I had so many different profs from just like different countries. They all had different accents, so I appreciated it a lot more. And that's why I tell kids, like, you can't have this accent prejudice, because like every one of the teachers here at McTavish, we all have a different accent when we speak French. And that doesn't make any accent lesser than, it's just different.
I find that so hard to wrap my head around, because I can understand, I only know one language. I know almost nothing of any other language. It's actually kind of pathetic, but going from Newfoundland and understanding Newfie English and going to Alberta and kind of hearing like someone in government in Edmonton speaking English, it's the same language, but it's very different. But I almost get the sense that French is almost even more difficult to kind of comprehend, that more different dialect, because it almost seems like the words change. Whereas Newfoundland, just the sound of the word changes, not the actual word itself. Is that an accurate kind of reflection?
Yeah, but there's also like, if you like the further east you go, the different Frenches you'll get. Like even in Quebec, there are different, I feel like dialect might be the right word.
So what would be a different word for dialect? Like, is there like actual labels for the language that's different? Like, is there a France French and a Quebec French?
Yeah.
Okay.
So but it's like more regional. So when you get to Quebec, the different regions, and like my dad's really good at like pointing them out. He'd be like, here's where this person is from, and here's where that person is from, and here's where this person is from. But like East Coast, there's Chiac, which is kind of like Acadien. It's very mixed, and it was kind of like,
that'd be like Eastern Quebec.
No. That would be like East Coast, like New Brunswick, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia.
The boys.
Yes. And I love listening to it because like they took so many English words, and it like there's a whole history to it, and I don't want to get into it because I know I won't do it justice.
A little bit. Just give us the crash course if you can.
Crash course. And I can't even think of any like examples of what Chiac would be right now, but there's like plenty of people online who are bringing back Chiac, and because it was really put down because the French community is like, well, that's not French, you can't speak like that, like it's not proper, if you will. Proper is probably a better word for pure, like I said earlier. And so for a long time people were like speaking Chiac was frowned upon like back east. But like there's a lot of like I guess thanks to social media, a lot of like social media presences, personalities are bringing it back, and like I follow them on Instagram, and I love like hearing the way they like mix French and English together, where it's not like Franglish, if you will, but
So I find this so literally foreign to me, just not knowing it. But talking about nationalism, grade 11, we talk about Quebec separatism, asymmetrical federalism, all those big terms. But what is it about the importance of the French language to the French that English people don't understand? What do you think?
So in university, we had profs who were really like against any taking of like, I feel like what would be the English term? Like in French, we call it anglicisme. And this could be an English word that you borrowed and then used in French, or you said like a whole sentence in French, but you basically like Google translated it in your head where like the syntax isn't proper, but you know, and so it's more like a fear of losing it, like a fear that the French language is going to disappear or be taken away. Because like even in Alberta, there was a moment in history where you weren't allowed to learn French, speak French, teach French, and so people were doing it in their basements.
Really?
Yeah.
What?
So when it would be like, oh my gosh, this would have been before you or I, but like 20th century mid, like at some point within there, where people were teaching French like in the basements of their churches, where they could,
Why? Okay, I'm mind blown enough because I assumed. Okay, so I'm checking an assumption of myself here of like Canada's always been officially kind of bilingual, or is that a 1982 thing?
Oof, yeah, that would.
Has it been bilingual since 1867, or was that the 80s? Whoa. Okay, how did I not know that? Interesting.
It's even like I didn't know that because I grew up in Ontario. They like, in all honesty, I feel like they're not doing Francophone education justice, because until like before I moved out here, I didn't really know that there was a huge like Francophone population in Alberta or in Saskatchewan or in like BC, because we learn about like Métis in Manitoba and how there's like the French there, and then basically I was taught that French ended with Manitoba and then there was just
BC and Alberta. Because I know Saskatchewan does it like a little bit different, where I think it's even ongoing right now that it's not, I think, mandatory, or they don't necessarily practice. Maybe it's Catholic schools. Maybe it's the Catholic school that's different. They don't have a Catholic board system. But I guess I've always kind of connected Catholicism and French.
Oh yeah.
And especially from an education perspective, because it's usually they go hand in hand. But honestly, like the thing for me that's been hard to understand is language loss is very much a real thing. Like I think I said we lose a language every 3 weeks or something like that worldwide of the, well, one indigenous languages, but it doesn't seem apparent to me that French is one of those languages.
Yeah. Like
you know what I mean?
I even looked this up because I was
Yeah.
like, it was going to be part of my argument.
Yeah. What's your argument? Go for it.
My argument is like parents forcing their kids into the French immersion program, and when the kid truly no longer wishes to be there, and it's, you know, their heart isn't in it. Like parents are hindering their, I don't want to say their education, because they're still getting a good education, but like they're not understanding anything anymore. And so, you know, kids who are currently getting 60s or 80s in French could be getting 90s to like perfect grades in English, because just like the comprehension. But it's like language loss. Well, like the statistic I found was like in Canada and like perhaps not Alberta, of the 18% that graduate French immersion and like properly, like have an actual French immersion thing, 9% will continue and be able to speak French in their early adulthood. So
half of graduates.
Okay. Because a lot of them don't practice. Like I had friends who like were in the Francophone school with me growing up, and like a year after they decided to go, they couldn't speak it anymore. They could understand most of it, but like couldn't hold up a conversation. And that's what we're getting right now with our like grade 12s, where because they aren't fully immersed, because like we're a French immersion school that stops offering, you know, half of the core subjects once they hit high school. So like it's really hard for our grade 12s to keep up like an actual conversation in French. Okay, and so do you find for yourself, do you think you would have been kind of more victim to that language loss potentially if you didn't go to the kind of education to teach it route? Oh my gosh. Like I didn't realize how much I lost until I went back to university in French, and I was like, wow, I still spoke it, but it's like one of those written things, like even now, like being back in like immersed in French culture for like 8 years with education. I'm still learning, and I will continue till the rest of my days, because so what do you think is one of like the biggest challenges for students in learning French? Because I find it's kind of obvious to me that it's the lack of practice outside of school, and like the affirmation of it seems to be one of the major things. That's with anything. If you stop practicing, you won't get it. But what are your thoughts there for like one of the biggest issues? Being in a French minority area. Okay, I keep going. Got it. Being in a French minority area, I feel like it's hard because they don't get to practice that much out of school. Yeah. So like we have kids within the program that started like a French club, and my goal with that this year is to create activities for students like outside of school where we can go and do something, and it will be done in French. So what could you do? Like what are some activities that you've thought of? Like in the past, some staff have told me that we've been able to convince the local theater to play French movies. We have students who are thinking maybe we can go skating, maybe like nature hikes. Well, incorporating community with the language. Yeah, exactly. So you actually use it in an informal sense. Yeah. And like being in Edmonton, they have like a whole area, you know, they have a lot of activities and stuff, and maybe I'm just like not looking hard enough, but I find that there's not as many activities here in town. And if there are, then it's really just for like the niche, like Boreal community, because it's like thrown through there, you know? So what would be the niche Boreal activity, and what are some things that they do? Like the people who work there or the students who go there kind of thing. Oh, like the actual school Boreal. Yeah, the actual. Oh, okay, yeah. I know, you hear like Northern Lights, Boreal Forest here all the time. I always get them mixed up, but yeah. So like, do you have any other things that you have for like a case for French education? Or like what are some of the big problems kind of facing it? Like where do you see it in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Like us in Well, I almost find, do you feel that the French language outside of the dominant areas is fading or getting better? No, I think it's changing. Okay. And because there's like plenty of people who will say like, oh, it's not getting better and everything. But I like the way the French language is changing. I like how it's allowing more people to like join in. Okay. You know? Like Montreal, that used to be well, I mean, it's still in Quebec. It's super French, but like in the past couple years with McGill and like a bunch of students, moving there, it's become extremely bilingual, where I have people going, well, I don't speak French, so I can't go to Montreal. And I was like, you'd be surprised at the amount of people like working everywhere who are bilingual or like barely speak French.
Yeah, and because I grew up being a Montreal Canadiens fan, and I the amount of times my dad and I watched Montreal and RDS I learned zero French. All I know is Le Bout is when they score, and it's usually when it goes against Montreal. But I don't know, I guess that's kind of been I've always thought like the language politics was just weird. I think I just always thought it was so strange. I don't know if I find I'm almost too just dismissive as a person anyway, or I almost find some of the normal things that people would get hung up on politically, I'm just like, it doesn't. Why is it so?
100%.
I just don't get it. But
I still don't get it. The people who are like so gung ho about it being a certain way and are so like closed off to change. And I'm not saying like I want the French language to just adopt a bunch of English words, but you have people in Europe being like, oh well, French in Canada is so washed out, etc. But if you look at it, like people in France adopt more English words within their like vernacular than what we do. We're using a lot of like old French that they've kind of like dusted away,
which is crazy to me. That I find, obviously we can get into our Canadian federalism as much as you want, but when it comes to Quebec being distinct as kind of the primary terminology used, especially when they didn't sign on with the charter. And then France is like, well, you guys are just washed up. I find that such a weird divide. I just like the language judgment is almost a weird of the preferred or the proper. I just don't understand, like, what does proper mean? Like, who has the right to say this is the right French or the right English?
And like growing up, I had a lot of, not like I'm talking about everyone else who has prejudice, but like being in a small community at the Francophone school, like I thought that kids who went to French immersion, like that they were learning nothing. I was like, there's no way these kids speak French. And then when I actually went to that school, I noticed that a lot of French immersion kids, like if you were to put them side by side, like maybe like speaking wise it's not the same, but written, French immersion kids like go above and beyond because they're learning all the rules, whereas in like French in Francophone schools they don't really teach, well they teach you the rules, but it's one of those things where it's like, well, I know that it's written this way, I don't know why, but this is how it is.
Okay, that's actually because one thing I've noticed, because we are both post-COVID teachers, arms in the air, is that there's gaps. And everyone, like, you go to every opening meeting for the district or every PD session is there's just gaps, and that you hear it over and over and over again. And I understand there's a certain utility to the consistent reminding and the kind of advocation for that, but one thing I've noticed from students is I'll sit and have, like, in my social 30 class, -1 and -2, I'll sit and have like the most intellectual conversation about this random subject with this kid. And then they submit me their writing, and it is just a dumpster fire. I've almost, the gap between verbal and written. I wouldn't say comprehension, but almost articulation is so much bigger than I anticipated. Like, you can talk to someone, but then the second they like, do you have a similar experience in French? And if so, how do you kind of mend how do you help students improve as writers in French?
So, and this might like, I might get some backlash for this, but
just go for it.
I'm learning like everyone else. We're still trying to figure out how to get over ChatGPT in French because it works in both languages. And I've had issues already this year with kids who are using ChatGPT or some kind of AI to write their stuff. Which,
if you're already in immersion and kind of lacking the necessary community practical skills, that's only going to hinder you. Because again, I understand the ambition of, I want my kid to finish grade 12, get their bilingual certificate. But if they've chat GPT'd their way through it, then they get into a
Yeah.
French job. It's like you're going to, and I know that's always the argument used to try
Mhm.
and instill importance to kids. It's like, well, then you'll just be useless in this
Yeah.
area when you're done. If you try to scheme your way through, like I always say to my kids, you know what? I know you guys are probably going to find a way to cheat. There's 40 of us in this
Mhm.
room. 39 are taking a test. I'm one person. I'm not. You do everything you can. You take phones away. You do whatever, but you understand they're going to come up
Yep.
with methods to do it. But I'm like, they don't understand that cheating actually hinders themselves more than they think. But anyway, you were saying, but the
So one thing that I'm trying out right now with my grade 11s is instead of grading them on syntax or grammar at this time on their written paper, I only do structure and content, because that, according to some other staff, like it's one thing that AI hasn't been able to perfect yet.
okay.
And so I'm able to see what they can offer, their ideas, etc. And then later I give them like a grammar, like a really messed up headache paragraph that they have to correct themselves.
Yeah, it's almost making them edit something.
Exactly.
Usually to
Yeah.
build the skills. Yeah.
One thing that I do allow them to use for their papers is something called Bon Patron. And what that is, I think it's like the French version of Grammarly, where they like copy paste their paragraph in it, and it'll show them all their mistakes and why that mistake is being made and how to fix it, and like different options to kind of fix it. And I allow them to use that, hoping that maybe they'll be like, oh, that's why I keep making this mistake, or
Yeah.
I'm not sure they're actually doing that, but
And because sorry, as you were talking there, I have this like constant internal battle of ChatGPT exists, and now it exists in French. How do you instill the value of being a good, like what does being a good writer do for you as a person? That's not just being able to write a good paragraph. You know what I find one of the things that students are, it's almost like, okay, now everyone said you'd never have a calculator with you all the time, but now we do. So is that going to be the same thing for kind of written language, where we kind of get into more, it's not seen as much of a need, but I almost find if you're going to look at someone who is, and this is not to cast judgment, but someone who's not university educated versus someone who is, let's say, for example, like we're in a trades community, like would you rather take the person who has 4 years of university education and then their 2-year power engineering degree, or someone who just has a power engineering degree? Obviously, the obvious choice is, okay, one person's more educated, but there's almost a belief that the 4-year quote unquote arts degree is diluted now because of all these tools. So what does that actually give that person?
Oh boy. So being able to write, like what's
well, it's just like, what does the building of thought and writing, and what does that provide you?
Isn't it like, personally I find like if you write well, you can appreciate good writing, and then you can also tell when someone's not that good at writing, and it helps with arguments and organization and getting your ideas out and sounding like a smart person, if you will.
Yeah, because I almost find you can tell it's like, oh, this guy's full of shit, or he has no idea where he's going, or I'm using he, I'm not meaning to, but you don't know where they are going. That's kind of been my, and I find that's useful for if you have your degree but your boss just makes no sense and anything, like there's always that kind of internal dialogue that I think that being a good writer and thinker helps, because I almost find writing is the purest form of thought, because that's kind of literally what you're trying to, and you're restructuring everything. So it's almost everything you say becomes your third edit rather than your first rough draft, just fundamentally. That's kind of the way I've tried to frame it to people. But would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you kind of do for, like, is there a challenge that's different from teaching English versus French writing that you find has been hard to overcome?
Like Google Translate. Absolutely rips my soul out every single time.
Honestly, I think I overthink this though, because I almost think like I'm looking for some sort of I don't know the blue pill, red pill stuff. I don't even know what those mean when the people refer to them. I'm like, oh yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, cool. But like an antidote to people appreciating. I don't know. Maybe I don't even really know what I'm referring to yet. But yeah, I almost find teaching writing to me. I love teaching writing.
Yeah.
And I love teaching the argumentation part. But every time I find it falls flat.
So like funny you say that because it actually like brought up like a repressed memory. In
That's what I'm here for.
university, our profs convinced us, they're like, you need this tool, and it was you had to buy it. You download it onto your computer, and it was called Antidote.
Okay.
And basically, it would go through your writing, and like very nitpicky would tell you where your paper is lacking or where it needs like some, where it needs work. And looking back on it now, like French and English, like you won't find, or maybe there are, but like I don't think it happens in university in English where your prof tells you, hey, you should download this to improve your papers.
Yep.
They just assume that you have those skills already.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's just one of those things where like the French language is so complex and such a pain in the butt that we kind of give students like a pass, because it's one of those things that again continues to evolve, and we can't expect our students to just know everything. I don't know everything, so like, and I still have to learn it. So
I know, and we'll get into the imposter stuff here in a little bit. But no, as you were saying, you unlocked the repressed memory for me. So
right on.
Well, because I guess the reason why this has been so important, I guess, to me was like I didn't do very well in high school, not because I didn't try, just because I just didn't do anything. And then, not that I was like a bad kid, I just didn't. Anyway, and so I go to university and I upgrade for a year. So I upgraded for a year and a half. And so I did English through SATE, English 30-1.
Yep.
And killed it. 95. Like destroyed it. You don't have to do a diploma back then if you were doing it through a college. Yeah, I didn't have, it was like a 30-1 equivalent. So I guess my first year out of, so this is funny. My first year upgrading out of high school was 2016. I went back to my old high school, just did the full year. Then second semester, I had social, biology. I think it was just the 2 subjects. And the fire happened. I didn't have to write the diplomas because of that.
Okay.
So I had like 9. But then the next semester, it actually was in the SATE English 30-1 equivalent program of studies. You do not have to write the diploma. So I got a 95 because I was just kind of one of those grade grubbers who wanted to get into university after.
Viewers out there, I am giving him the dirtiest look right now. Oh my goodness.
But I get, so I'll ask you your story here in a sec, but like the jump, because I went from, it was first semester, it was, so from September to December, I did English at SATE. From January to April, I did open studies at Mount Royal. So this was like the next month I actually kind of started university. And then I've been to like 6 different universities. That's a whole thing. It's it's not ideal. I wouldn't recommend it. It's a lot of paperwork and applications and BS. But my first paper I wrote in my first history class, Joe Anderson, bless his heart, history prof at Mount Royal, great guy. he could sit there and talk about farming for 2 hours, and I was there for it. But wrote my first paper, Reconstruction. Awesome. I was like I was loving the history. I was getting into it. Submitted my paper on Blackboard, and I was like so pumped to get my mark back. I was like, I just got a 95 in English. I'm tearing it up. 52% D-. I was like, holy. God. And then, so first off, I was like, okay, there's something I'm clearly missing here. That's not whatever. But so I remember I went and I asked him if he had like after school helps, which was office hours. So I was kind of learning that lingo. And he said to me, he's like, yeah, come upstairs. And I remember him, it was so vivid in my mind when he was like, your paper sucked. But he was being super nice about it. And he was like, he was, and this is kind of I feel like I'm kind of learning as I'm saying this, that this is kind of how I deliver feedback the way he did it now. He was just crushing his peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And he was like looking through and he said, this has been the biggest problem I've seen from K-12 students is that their writing is trash. And so I guess my main thing was, okay, how do I help solve that problem? Because how do I make it so that 19-year-old Lucas doesn't walk into his history class with his chest held high, like, oh, I'm going to tear it up and get in straight A's. It took me like 2 years. Like by the time I actually finished university, weird flex, I had to get a 3.9 GPA because I had to get that to get into secondary ed at U of A. But my first year and a half was like 2.5, 3.0.
Yeah.
But
you needed 3.9?
So see, this is part of my 6 university thing.
Oh my goodness.
So when I applied for education initially, if you apply out of high school, it's much easier to get in than it is once you're in university and you're actually looking for the after degree. So a lot of people, if you apply out of high school, you get into the 5-year combined program where it's like 3 years of whatever major you want to do and then 2 years of ed. As long as you maintain a 2.0, you're good. But it had to do with U of A and U of C. So I didn't get into U of C, even with a 3.9 GPA, because I don't know the number of seats, quote unquote, that they had.
Okay.
But I know that from what I understand, U of C has a smaller program. So that means that if they have 50 seats, but 1,000 people apply, like really you only need, and I'll use that just as an example.
Yeah.
If you only need a 2.0 GPA to get in, but then you have that big of a base to work with, then obviously you're going to take your top 50 applicants, right? Yep. That's kind of like the way it goes. Whereas U of A, so I had 3.9 at U of C. So for secondary social studies, because it was the most competitive one, it was only the most competitive because it's the one that most people wanted to do.
Yep.
And it was 3.85 I had, but I think it was 3.9 something that had to get into that program. And then for law school at U of C, you needed a 3.66. And so I was like, this doesn't make any sense, because you hear like, oh, lawyers are your most intellectual, smart people. And not that they're not, but I said, how the frig could I technically get into this law school by having 2 full points over, but I can't get into this education program? Anyway, then I go to U of A and I finally get in, but it's through COVID. But I can't remember where I was going with that at the beginning. But anyway, it was...
we were talking about like writing your paper and the fact that you got like 50 on your...
Yeah, so I can't remember how I was finished off with that, but I almost found, I guess, how do you kind of instill that value earlier in life so that you don't go through a bunch of random loopholes to try to just like get 6 years into uni. I don't know. That was kind of the lesson I learned going through that.
I went through the same thing because I did a French major and an English minor. So at university, I had to take some equivalent like courses to what's the word, to like fill my minor. Yep. But Campus Saint-Jean only offered like 2 English classes. So I had to go to main campus to find some. And so I found one and I was like, it was called like popular culture in literature. And I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds awesome. Yeah. I get there. It's African popular culture in literature. And I was like,
okay, I feel like I've seen this course.
This is not what I signed up for, but you know what?
Whoa.
Like I'll do it.
Okay, yeah, go on. Sorry. Go on.
Yeah. And I absolutely loved it. I learned so much stuff. I still have the books. Yeah. It like I found in university I really like delved into like my love for literature. But the first paper I handed in, I was like, oh man, like my ideas
my
so
close
strong.
reading is great.
And then I got the grade back and I was like, what? And then I looked over my paper and I was like, what was I on? And I noticed that like there was no structure. I just kind of wrote what I was thinking and then handed that in.
The importance of revision is huge.
No kidding.
Like first draft is ass.
But my mistake was, and I learned this later because I had some profs who were like, they were good teachers, but at the same time, if you didn't write what they wanted you to, then they wouldn't. So I learned later than I wish I had that always go to your prof and be like, what are you looking for? Yeah. What like structure do you want? What citing do you want, etc. Because a lot of them will just assume you know, and that's like the biggest mistake. Like,
and that's a hard change for university that I'm kind of just realizing now too, is being now a high school teacher teaching social 30 for a few years now. I almost find the process of becoming a better teacher in Alberta is how much better can you apply the standard of the standardized testing? Whereas going to university, your professor, it's no such thing as standardized testing. It's the assessments, because realistically, because a lot of like assignment types I take from so I was weird. All through university, I would look through, like I did history and political science in my undergrad. I would look through the Alberta curriculum for grade 10, 11, 12 all the time. And I would purposely select my courses so that it would line up with the topics I would eventually have to teach. So if you go into my classroom, and I'm a note taker by hand. So if you go into my classroom right now, I have like 5 binders that are like 3 inches thick of all of my university lecture notes.
Holy.
And so I find, I don't know why I am that way. I'll have to train of thought again.
I still have them. I still have all my notes from uni. Like I never go through them. I'm like, I'll go through this later. Yeah. And they're just gathering dust. Yeah.
Well, sometimes like I'll think about try to way to freshen up what I'm doing. And honestly, within 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, I can talk about that and that. Yeah. I almost find that's so helpful for referring back to, because I almost find the more, and so where I was going with that point before, was the professors don't have a standard they're trying to uphold. It's like, no, they're teaching a course, they're specialized in that course, they have a PhD in that course. So I almost find because they know so much more about that specific topic, you really have to build a relationship with your professor will be like instrumental for you doing better. But yeah, so
earlier you had actually said that you upgraded, and I also upgraded my English, because I was taken out of -1 in grade 11. Although like I was still like strong. It's just my like TA was like, hey, you should go.
You lived in Alberta?
Yeah.
In Edmonton?
Yeah. Okay. I went to St. Joe's. In the Gene Force Leadership Academy all-girls program that like I did 1 year of, and then in grade 12 they're like, oh no, we're gonna mix you up with all the boys.
Okay. What was that like?
It wasn't bad. It was nice. I made friends. But like their driving point was like, without distractions in the classroom, your daughter will do so much better. And I was like, okay, but like you didn't think about me and my friends just gossiping and like having a blast. So yeah, it was still fun. Like I made a lot of good friends. I did like the school a lot.
Would you ever want to teach at like an all-girls school or an all-boys school?
No.
No?
No.
Honestly, I find the more of a melting pot, the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
To teach in, because like even right now we kind of have, in our context here in Fort Mac, you almost of all the high schools, I find each high school kind of has like their niche now.
They do.
But McTavish is,
what are we?
We're just like, let's go for it. Yeah, like we had the conversation earlier this year of like, what school do we want to be?
Absolutely.
But I almost find it's nice not having identity.
It is.
I don't know. It's almost like, just come on.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out. Yeah. We'll kind of go with the. Hey everyone, thank you all for tuning in. Really do appreciate it. Just wanted to say again, if there are any issues with professional conduct and or you would like to share your own story, experience, or have something you would like to contribute to the show, please do not hesitate to reach out at lucasrdclark97@gmail.com or send a direct message on Instagram to @MrClarkAfterDark. Hope you all enjoyed, potentially found something of use, and of course, please do not forget to subscribe. See you guys all next time. Unless you're scared.